program is brought to you by Newsworks in cooperation with the Eau Claire Area School Board. This program is simulcast on WRFP-LP 101.9 FM.
It's 2:30, so we'll go ahead and get started. And I think we've got everybody here. Marissa, do we have any public comment today?
No specific public comment, no.
Okay, perfect. Then I am going to share my screen and we'll go ahead and start right with our agenda today.
Oh, Abby, really quick, I was just reading through, Mark had sent over a thing. He doesn't have any true public comment, but just wanted me to read a little thing that asks in the future if the PowerPoint presentations could be archived with the minutes. So I'll just throw that out there.
Okay, thank you for sharing. Okay, so I think that you need to make me the presenter to be able to share my screen.
I just sent it over.
And here we go. Okay, hopefully you guys can all see my screen because I think you can. So today on our agenda, we wanted to start with public forum. And then the second item is approval of minutes. So you should have all received the minutes from our last meeting. And so we would need a formal motion to go ahead and approve them. Or if there's any changes, we would just have you let us know that as well.
A motion to approve.
Second.
So I don't hear anybody talking. Is it just me?
Can you hear me?
Okay. I don't hear it.
Don't hear it.
I don't know what's wrong. Because my speakers are on.
Oh, quickly.
This?
What's the word?
It's maddening. I've had that happen too.
Oh, there goes.
It's still not coming through them.
Do you want to sit at mine?
I just can't hear what they're saying.
Yeah, but if you sit at mine, then you can hear it.
But everybody's going to hear me. So it'll be fine. I just don't know who motioned and approved.
Oh, Lori and Phil did.
Okay. I guess just keep my door cracked and then if you want to do that part. Okay, so I understand that Lori and Phil, you two, somebody motioned and approved, and so I'm gonna have Marissa help me because I can't hear, and my speakers are good. So sorry about that today. So if everybody's in favor of that, go ahead and say aye.
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 All right, and then actually I heard you guys. So we're good. We're approved. Okay. So really today, the bulk of our meeting is really going to be talking about our budget update and where we're at. And I do have a lot of information to share with you today. And I also want you to recognize that this is, draft one, round one that you're seeing today. It will change. Probably some things will get finalized between now and the board presentation on Monday night. And then again, it will be different when the board adopts the final budget on October 26th. And I'll take some time, and if you have questions, please just go ahead and ask them. I'd rather answer them along the way versus trying to wait till the end because there's a lot of information here. We're going to try to keep it at a high level because there's a lot of stuff here, but just thought it would be important to kind of walk you through and remind you. Phil, I think this is your first time through the formal budget process with us. And so, feel free to pitch in. I know that, there's probably some similarities and probably some differences to, UW Stout and some of the things that we do. So first, a quick update with our 19-20 budget compared to our 19-20 actual. So I know that I had shared with budget development probably a couple of months ago that we were anticipating a budget surplus at the end of the year. And so I think I had shared that I thought it was going to be around 5 million at that point in time. We have finalized everything for 19-20, and that number actually jumped to about 7.7 million. The big changes really came in the contracted services area. So when you think about subs for contractual absences and transportation, that was a big chunk of where it was. Some other things that were different were some of the wages, because, for example, middle school increments were not fully paid out at the end of fourth quarter because obviously middle school sports didn't happen in fourth quarter. So the district we paid people that had already kind of been in had been through the HR process and had been approved. But there were some coaches obviously that get hired right before the season. And so some of those wouldn't have been paid at that point in time. So some big differences to be expected when you shut down 3 months of operations. You probably are going to end a lot different than where you thought. So some of the operating revenue differences really came about due to fees that we collect. That was probably one of the big items. And then I feel like there was another that was different than what we were expecting. And I'll just take a peek at what that would have been. Our state aid was about the same. I think it was some of it just ended up being in some of our other funds that we didn't have as much revenues as what we were projecting and things like that. So any questions about that or anything else that I can answer for you related to 1920?
Abby, is there a kind of I mean, I'm picturing some kind of a visual that would just lay out where the bulk of the difference, the 7 million or so from the original projection, where the bulk of that comes from. Is it hard? Would it be hard to include something like that for Monday's presentation to just sort of?
No. Yeah, we talked about doing that, but we didn't do it. But I can add that pretty easily for Monday.
Okay, great. I think it would be real helpful to just have that picture and would answer a lot of questions right out of the gate.
Okay, sure.
Abby, did the school district received federal CARES funds?
Mm-hmm.
Is that included in this?
It is not. So the way that our CARES funds work is we actually have to apply through. So they gave us an allocation. We have to go in and say, here's how we want to spend it. And so we have a period of time. I think they went into effect like March 20th or something of 2020. And they're actually good until September of 2022. But we didn't allocate any of our CARES money for the 1920. And that's one of the things you'll see on my list that we're still finalizing.
Okay.
Is how do we want to spend that and allocate that? And so we're leaning on using those funds in this upcoming year, 2021. And so we're just kind of finalizing those details. And so I can share a little bit more about that when we get there.
Okay. All right. Yeah. This is the yeah. Okay.
Okay. All right, we'll go ahead and just kind of something that we've been watching and keeping an eye on a lot is really our fund balance. And I know that's what we have been really talking about over the last several years, because we are kind of getting to a point where we were very concerned about, that number getting too low, and also being concerned about what is it's going to look like, how does it impact our credit rating, our ability to borrow, and some of those conversations that we've had. So you can see that $7 million number from last year really did bump our fund balance up. And, again, very unexpected and not something that we can plan on every year. If that was a reality, we'd probably be hearing from our taxpayers some more as well. But due to those events that were really beyond our control and closing down, that's really where that came from. And so, and keep in mind that this percentage on the bottom, our auditors like us to be between 25 and 32% is kind of their recommendation. They'll also tell you that they don't have very many school districts that are in that percent range. But it does make me feel a little bit better when I see that 26% number. And keep in mind that that's calculated just based upon our Fund 10 general fund expenditure. And so, that's the formula, and that's what they look at is what are your general fund expenditures and how much of that is your fund balance currently worth at that point in time. So, and based upon where we are today, and I'll get there in just a few minutes, but based upon today's budget that I'm giving you and presenting information on, we are at a little bit of a deficit right now. And so that's why that number is 24.9%. Again, this is where we're at today. There's still a lot of things that we're working through. And so that final number will look different, but this is where we're at today. And I wanted to share that because we've been talking about fund balance. And it's been on our radar quite a bit because we were getting to a point where we were pretty worried about it. Any questions on the fund balance piece? Okay.
Just a comment. I mean,
sure.
in years of after years of watching this, I certainly didn't expect us to be able to hit that target
no.
so quickly and so unexpectedly. But obviously, it's pretty extraordinary circumstances.
Exactly. And then the challenge is going to be to try to maintain it, right? So that's the other piece. You have these unexpected things happen, and then you hit that target of where the auditors want you to be, but will that stay there? And I think there's just, I think I've shared this with, the board and budget development as well. I think for 2021, probably not expecting a lot of changes, but I know there's been a lot of conversation in the legislature, and Mike and I sat in on a WASPA, I think it was yesterday, with some DPI people, and, legislatures talking a little bit, what is that going to look like for 21, 22, and 22, 23, that next biennium budget, and lots of conversations happening, nothing definitive yet, of course, but, just things that they're talking about and things that they've got their eyes on. So, that definitely could have an impact to us a year or two down the road. So we'll definitely keep that at our forefront for sure. Okay.
Thanks.
So if we look at our operating revenue to our operating expense, and this is where we're at today, I thought it was important to look at our budget from 1920 if we would have had a normal full school year. At the end of the year, our revised budget with the budget adjustments throughout the years showed that we would have about 120,000 positive. Again, talking about the actual, we came out on that 7.7 million plus side. And today where we're at right now, I'm showing about a deficit of about $768,000. And so again, that's going into that play with the fund balance going down. If we look at our operating revenues, where we actually landed last year in our preliminary budget, very similar. If we look at that compared to our 1920 budget, in our preliminary budget, there's some differences there. Some things impacting that really come down to the tax levy, which I'll share a little bit more information with you on that today. Also, our fees that we collect. And so obviously we are probably not going to collect any revenues from co-curricular admissions because we know that the Big Rivers Conference said that they aren't going to be selling tickets. And for students competing, when we, at this point in time, when we move to that alternate season, kids will get a ticket or a band, and there will be limited numbers of spectators, but they won't be charged for that. And so I've taken that out of our budget because we don't anticipate to get any revenue. And that piece alone was about $180,000. And so that's a piece of it, right? And then if we talk about some of the other fees that we collect, our parking permits, I think you'll remember that the board voted in September to, instead of charging a normal parking permit rate, because students are only in school 2 days, if they're attending, they're going 2 days a week. And so we reduced the parking permit fee from $50 to $12.50. And so we aren't anticipating generating any revenue from parking permits this year. The other piece that we'll talk about today, and I'll get to it, is I want to talk with the board about athletic fees. Because again, kind of how this system is working, what do we want to do? So right now, I don't have anything in there for athletic fees because I think we need to have a conversation about what should we do with that. Let's see what else is in there. What else is different? Our state aids are up, and I do have some more detail that I can share that with you as well. So kind of, those are some of the big things to look at what's different between 1920 budget and what's our preliminary budget where we're at today. Any questions just from that big picture before I move on?
Abby, is the 2020 to 21 budget, obviously we're operating very differently this year than we have in past years. Is that those changes, you've mentioned changes to fees and projecting ahead with that, all the changes in our operations and the different costs, how confident do you feel? I assume those have been woven into this projection. Can you confirm it? And then also, how confident do you feel about those projections? Are there just still a lot of unknowns?
Some things I feel pretty good about, and there's other things that I don't feel good about at all. So on one of the slides, I have all of the things that we're still working on or that, are different from previous years, and just things that we're trying to, we've put our best guess forward, and there's some things that we know are going to change. And so how do we weave that into our budget? And so that's part of why I will be expecting some changes over the course of the next few weeks. And I have one sheet where I kind of outline them and thought we could talk about them more definitively. Okay. So if we kind of we'll talk about revenue first, because that's pretty definitive. I feel pretty good about those. And so really when we break down our revenue, I'm strictly looking at our operating funds. So I'm looking at Fund 10, Fund 27, and Fund 29. And so you can see where the big differences are when we look at our budget and our actual and where we are today with our preliminary budget. So the local source, you can see we were, around 54 million last year, and we're about 51 million now. The driver of that, the biggest piece, is our tax levy. And so our tax levy is going down because our state aid is going up. And if you remember, that's like a scale. So if our state aid goes up, then our tax levy is going to go down. So the biggest part of this, 54 to 51 million is really due to our tax levy and the changes for that. Obviously, there's a piece of it that's going to be the co-curricular admissions that we were just talking about it. A piece of it's going to be the parking permits, because that's coming from local dollars within our community. But the biggest chunk of that difference is really our tax levy, and I'll break that down a little bit more in just a couple of minutes for you as well.
But we see the corresponding offset on the state source line, right?
Right. Yep. Exactly. The interdistricts within Wisconsin, that's really comes down to open enrollment. And so this is one of these this is my best guess today, because I'm using numbers based upon last year's actuals. I know that number is going to change because we know we have more students that have open enrolled out just due to the pandemic. We've talked and we've heard from families that are able to go to a different school in our neighboring area, and they can go to school 5 days a week. And so I expect that number goes up. So that's a number, but until we get our October 15th certification, I don't know what that number is. So I always conservatively budget. What did we pay to other districts? What did we collect? This one's the kids coming in from other districts. So what did we get from other districts to have their students attend here? Bill, did you catch I was talking about it backwards?
Yeah, I did catch that.
Sorry.
Yep, no.
Yeah, my brain was thinking about open enrollment in general, and So the revenue side. So again, I'm budgeting conservatively, but I do expect that number could be a bigger impact to our budget this year than in the past year, just with our different model this year. Our intermediate source is really it's really our Head Start grant from year to year that comes through. And then that state source, again, as we were just talking about, that's up about 4 million. 2 million of that is in our just in our regular state aid. And then the other part is really more related to the revenue limit increase. And so if you'll remember, there was an additional amount in the legislature to add to our revenue limit. I think it was $175 per pupil more, maybe, or something like that. And so I don't have my revenue limit worksheet in front of me to give you that exact amount, but that's really where those dollars are coming from. And so, again, that's that offset to why our tax levy is going down. It's because that additional money was put in the biennium budget through the state aid. And again, that number will change between now and the end of October because I'll get that final number on October 15th when DPI certified our aid to us. So this number right now is based upon the aid estimate that was provided to us on July 1st. And that's very typical that that's what we use when we build our preliminary budget. And then we adjust it once we get everything certified on October. Our federal source is going to be any grants that we've got. So really it's going to be Title I, it's going to be our flow through grants and things like that. And so those will ebb and flow every year. Usually our budget is low when we adopt it because we're still figuring out how are we going to spend those dollars. Sometimes we don't even have all of our allocations yet, so we can't budget for them because we don't know what we should be budgeting for. So that those numbers will change, and those are part of the budget adjustments that the board approves on the business part of the meeting that happens once a month. You probably wouldn't see any adjustments to them until November or December at the earliest, just because we kind of hold all of them until we have a formal budget adopted. So I'm not concerned right now that there's a difference there because a lot of it just comes from timing. And so this is where the CARES money would show up as well. Once we figure out how we want to allocate that and use it, that would go under that federal source line as well.
And what, do we know an amount on that?
Yeah, it's just over $1.5 million is what we got from the CARES allocation. Jim and I have been working on it, and I think we have to, there's a private school piece that comes off of that. And that's right around $50,000, I believe. And so we're trying to figure out how are we, what's our plan and how do we want to use those funds so we can get that in and get approval from DPI. But it's right around that $1.5 million mark is what we've been allocated. Our special education fund. So if you'll remember, our special ed revenues always are lower than what our expenses are. And so we have that line item that's the transfer. And so as part of our general tax levy, we have to allocate part of that to Fund 27 because it's our revenues and expenses have to equal each other. And so you can see that there was about a $2 million difference between the 1920 budget and the 1920 actuals. A big part of that was in salary and fringe, and then transportation, because our transportation costs went way down at the end of last year because we weren't transporting students. And so again, that's going to carry into how much dollars were spent out of special ed because that's just to make special ed break even. So that's kind of a big number, but that's going to ebb and flow, and it's based upon the budget's based upon here's what we think it's going to be, and then that actual is what it ended up being at the end of the year based upon the special ed.
Yeah, is there a reconciliation? Does that money have to get sent back, or how is that?
No,
how does it work?
No, it doesn't get sent back at all. It's just part of it's part of our operating expenses. So we levy. Here's what all we think the expenses are. It's just the transfer between Fund 10 and Fund 27 is less because there's less expenses in 27. Okay. And then our other revenue, that's going to be just made up of different things. Our capital leases, so our technology leases are going to show up in there. That's probably the biggest amounts that we see in there right now because that's something different that we've done. And that's, we have to, the year that we create the lease, we have to record that whole amount that we're borrowing as a revenue. And then the offset would be the expense of the actual items that they're purchasing. And then after that, the expense is really the payments that we're making. So you kind of have a increased revenue, but you also have an increased expense because you have to recognize the cost of those devices. So it's really a wash. But unless it's side by side, you don't see that there. So again, that's what that part is. And then obviously last year we had the sale of Little Red. We don't have that this year. And so that was something that we had called out separately last year, just as a reminder that it was kind of a one-time piece. Any other questions about operating revenue?
So, Abby, is this revenue or is this budget?
This is going to be the revenue budget. This is the revenue.
So this is actual revenues. These are not, this isn't a budgeted revenue that might not hit actuals.
So the 2021 preliminary budget is exactly what you're talking about. Here's what we think our revenues are going to be. Here's what we're planning for.
All
we
right.
won't know the actuals till a year from now.
Okay.
Okay. So it's our best laid plans based upon what we know today. And hopefully we know enough of it to feel comfortable with that's what the numbers are going to be. Okay. So if we talk about operating expenses, then you're going to see some swings here as well. And that's why I purposefully put what was our 1920 budget look like compared to what is our current preliminary budget. So you can see if we just look at the far left-hand column and the far right-hand column, not a lot of fluctuation between those two. We were at 167 million versus 165 million. The areas that are up are the ones that you'd expect to be up. You know, salary and fringe, we know that there was salary increases. We know that there was a health insurance increase, OPEB's in there. So all of those, you know, kind of cost of doing business things are reflected in there. Obviously, some differences last year between where we thought we were going to land. You know, we had a preliminary budget under salary and fringe, and we underspent there. Erin, I'll break that down a little bit more detail on Monday night too, if we need to. But basically, you know, I know we had some unfilled positions. I know we had some benefit differences as well. And so that's really, you know, one of the big drivers as to why did we end so differently? Contracted services, again, the big difference between the budget and the actual really comes down to the fact that we had much less in transportation costs. Our sub costs were less. Those are the two big drivers in that contracted services area. Right now, it looks like, you know, contracted services is low. And that's because I want to talk with the three of you. It's on my list when we get here. I got to go through this and then kind of talk through the questions and the things that need to be, that you should be aware of. But transportation right now, our day-to-day transportation is low in this number. And so that number will change and it'll be based upon the conversation that we're going to have in just a few minutes as well. You can see our supply amount, our supply plan is up quite a bit. That's the devices. Remember how I said we have to record the full cost of the devices? And so those are, we know what those costs of the devices are. And so that is what's driving that preliminary budget number to the 11 million in comparison to the 7 and the 5. That's 100% of what that difference is the devices. When we look at capital, you know, we had budgeted about 1.6. We ended up spending just over 3 million because we knew that we had some projects that needed to be done and we had some extra time and we had some extra dollars. We shifted some of those projects, things that came up and things that were like, hey, you know, it'd be really nice while we have the time to get those done. So we did make a few changes there and spent a little bit more than what we were planning on in that capital area. And this year's preliminary budget, again, in the capital area, it's going to be our 5-year capital plan. It's going to be some equipment needs that we've got and identified. So that's what that is. Insurance, you know, I know we've talked about this a lot over the last few years. That's going to be our property insurance, our liability insurance. Workers' comp has been going down for us. We've had a couple of really good years. And so that's why you kind of see that insurance number going down. Usually it goes up. And so work comp is the big difference in there. I'm going to say this now because we've already had two fairly significant injuries since the beginning of the school year. And so I would anticipate that next year that number is going to go back up. So just kind of putting it out there that we've had a couple of good years, but now, and we're only in, you know, the end of September and we've had two pretty significant things that have happened. So I anticipate a year from now, the conversation will be that it's going up. And then really that special education fund 27, you saw it on the revenue side, you saw it on the expense side, they net each other out because it's an expense in fund 10 and a revenue in fund 27. And then when we go to debt, other, and dues and fees, that's really going to be any debt service payments that we need to make just to that services our debt to make sure that we're doing everything that we're supposed to be. Dues and fees are going to be related to student entry fees or district dues that we need to pay and things like that. And so that doesn't fluctuate a lot. And so, but it does fluctuate a little bit. I think we had some additional fees with the, I think there was a piece related to the capital leases in there, and that's why you kind of saw the difference last year from the 308 to the 607, and that's why, you know, it's kind of flattening out a little bit. So again, this is where we're at today. Again, I know that these numbers are going to change, and and I can tell you what I expect to change and what we're still working on. But first, I would like to give you a chance if you have any questions. I'm happy to answer them.
Do you have other funds that's covering debt service? That's pretty low. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Yep. I kind of wanted to focus on the operating expenses and the operating funds, and then I do have a couple of slides on the others because obviously that pulls into the tax levy. The debt service does for sure. Okay.
And you said you will be talking about contracted services soon?
Yes.
Okay.
Exactly. So
I'll hold that.
Here's our list. When I said I was talking about a list of things that we need to still finalize and things that we're working through, this is a pretty hefty list. But a lot of this is due to just how we're doing business on a day-to-day piece. And so there's things that normally at this time of year, we don't have this many things on our list to kind of finalize. And so I wanted to take some time and share that with you because it will make some changes, and we're still finalizing them on our end, and that's why I can't share them, you know, why they're not included in these numbers. So obviously some of these are in that staffing area. So I know that you're aware that, you know, we have been reviewing staffing models, and we've been looking through you know, what our class size is looking like, shifting some staff to virtual classrooms instead of face-to-face classrooms. And so through that process, we've had to make some changes to staff. And so what we're doing is just kind of summarizing all of those changes that were made and making sure that our budget actually reflects that. And so I met with HR yesterday, and so we had probably 3 solid pieces of lists of people that we have to, you know, just make sure we have them in the right place and make sure we've got the right budget. And so I do anticipate that we should have that finalized. I don't know if we'll have it by Monday or not. I mean, obviously that's our goal, but that's just something that is a moving part that we're not used to at this time of year. And so that's causing us a little bit of just really digging in and looking at things, and do we have things where it belongs. Another piece related to that is overloads. So we've had a lot of conversations about the overloads, and because we know that we've got some staff members that are teaching 5 out of 5 periods, or maybe they're teaching partially virtual and partially face-to-face. And so there's been a whole process that KE has been working with principals as well to determine what do overloads look like in this environment. And so I think we have the high schools pretty well figured out, but the middle school and the elementary piece is still kind of in flux. And so I know that yesterday when I met with HR and we worked through some of that, that I have a number, but I know that number is going to be different than the one I have today because they're still finalizing and working through. And sometimes it's just that how long it takes for that flow of information, because we get the information and we start putting it together and then there's more questions. So that overload piece is one that's still being worked on and discussed. And so that will be a change in that salary and fringe line once we get it all finalized and reflected in our budget. And those are really, we have overloads every year, but due to this, the different model and the things that we're in, the overload is very different than what it's been in the past. And so that's been part of our learning as we got the school year going as well. So
do you anticipate it's going up or
yes,
going?
I do anticipate they're going up. Increments. Increments is another one that we have been working through as well. So we've got 2 different kinds of increments in the district. We have kind of the operational ones that need to happen in order for us to function on a day-to-day basis. And then you have the increments that are for coaches or extracurricular activities or things like that. And so I can tell you that in our Fund 80 specifically, and when we get there and talk about it, you will see this. We know that middle school fall sports have been canceled. They're not going to be making them up. So we have removed the fall costs from Fund 80 and from the tax levy because we know that that's not going to happen. And so we don't want to over budget and over levy. And so that's a difference. We're working through some of those same questions for Fund 10 and for Fund 27, the two funds that we're looking at in the operating pieces. I anticipate that we're going to approve them and send them through because many of them we can't answer the questions yet. So if you think about athletics, right now we believe that we're going to have 3 seasons. We're going to have a winter season, a fall season, and then a spring season. But we don't anticipate changing the amount of them. It's just like we need to get them posted in. When I talk about the operational ones, Kay's been working very closely with the principals as well and trying to find out what extra work is being done. It looks very different because there isn't after school activities going on, not in the building. The after school activities that are happening now are probably more virtual. And so basically the conversation's been is if those things can happen and you can still do like math counts, you can still have your math counts team meet and compete because you're doing it virtually, that's great. We're going to approve that increment because we know that work is being done. And so there's kind of been a process going through instead of it just being an automatic, yep, we're paying that. And so we're finalizing that as well. And so I know that piece will likely change as far as the budget goes as well. Then we kind of get more into the contracted services area. So in the substitute category right now is we need to look at our substitutes because if we look at what we've done for the last 3 years, that's very different than what we're able to do today with subs because, we're in classes 4 days a week, not 5 days a week. And what's the availability of the subs and things like that. So I'm really working with HR right now of what do we think is going to happen this year and how do we project it based upon kind of what's already happened in this month of September. So we're working on finalizing that piece. And so that's a piece that isn't articulated well in the budget right now because it's so different than what we're used to. We don't want to inflate our budget, but we also don't want to not have anything there because we know that we're going to have some costs. It's just trying to, put that best guess estimate forward and say, here's what we think it's going to be. And we might shoot low, we might shoot high, but at least we've got a basis for, kind of what our estimate is. And so that's another piece of why that's on our list today. Our transportation contract with student transit. So you'll probably remember that after we adopt the budget, usually in November, we bring forward the transportation contract for updating the rates because you'll know that our rates that we pay student transit are tied to our revenue limit increase. And so one of the things that came to light as part of the pandemic was our contract doesn't guarantee a specific amount of revenue to student transit or a specific amount of payment for us in the event of a long-term closure. So what our contract does say is that if there is snow days or if there is a day that's not going to be made up, we pay 18% of our daily revenue is what our cost to us. So when I talk about having transportation cost savings for the months of April and so half of March, April and May, and then a little bit of June, we paid 18% for transportation, which is very, very low. Most districts, their contracted transportation providers, they were paying 85, 90, some were even required to pay 100%. And not because it's just because they didn't have anything in their contract. Because our contract said 18%, that's what we ended up paying. Jim Fye and I had a lot of conversations about, that doesn't really seem right. It doesn't really seem correct. And we were prepared on a couple of occasions to bring it to the school board to ask for a modification to the contract because it just doesn't make sense. We need him to be able to transport our students. That's a state statute. We're required to provide that transportation. But I know that there was some discussions about, well, why would we favor that contractor versus another contractor. And in my mind, the rationale for that is because state statute tells us we have to transport our students to school. You know, there's a law, versus we're not required to do some of the other contracts that we might have. So what I wanted to talk with you about today was changing that contract for going forward, because obviously even right now we're transporting 4 days a week. We're not doing the midday routes. We're not doing a lot of the things that we would do, that we would be paying for, and that also would, help that relationship, because we depend on Jim as much as he depends on us. And so if he were to go out of business, it would take us a while to find another transportation provider to be able to come in and service the amount of students that we've got. So Jim and I have been working closely, and Mike and I have talked as well, that we would like to put something into the contract that would guarantee that the district would pay 80% of the daily rate that we would normally pay for transportation in the event of a long-term closure, because that 18% is just not, it's just not as much. The other piece of that Jim and I talked about is we would like to include, if there's any federal assistance or anything that would come through the state, that we could rehab that discussion. So in the event that there's like CARES money available or paycheck protection loans, or some of the things that we saw last spring with the pandemic, if something like that would become available to him, then we would ask to come back to the table and be able to have a conversation about how do we modify that 80%. From both businesses. It doesn't benefit us. There's nothing we can do. We're not eligible for some of the things that they would be eligible for. But again, he also doesn't want to have us paying 80% and getting additional, funds from elsewhere. And so Jim felt that we could have a conversation about what that could look like in the event there are some other options available to generate revenue. So thoughts about that? Questions?
How sort of normative is that, this idea, like, of other districts that are in similar situations?
Like as far as a contract with their provider?
Yeah, right.
Okay. The ones that I talked to, some of them didn't have any clauses in their contract at all. And so the expectation for many of them was they either renegotiated and they paid maybe 80, 85, 90%. Some I know paid 100% of their transportation contract, just because there wasn't any language in their contract at all. If I had to guess, based upon the information that I saw across the state when those questions were asked, my guess is the average was 80 to 85%, is what most districts ended up paying.
I guess I'm surprised that that clause wasn't in there to begin with, that there wasn't some sort of floor already built. And I'm guessing that there's not language in the contract that also deals with, 10 years ago when gas was at $4 a gallon, was there a fuel surcharge that was applied?
Sure. Actually, there is a fuel charge in our contract, and it's 97.7 cents, and that's remained consistent all of these years. That's not something that we've ever changed, and I have no idea how the 97.7 cents came about, but that's what it is. And Jim and I have never had any conversations about needing to change that. I think that you're right. I was very surprised that there wasn't something in the contract either, but we've never been in this situation. And when we've been closed before, it's been for snow days. Even if we rewind and go before the pandemic, the previous year when we had the snow days, we paid 18% for the first 5 days. And then the other days we paid our regular revenue because we made them up. Mm-hmm. And so we've not been in this situation before. And so I think that it kind of caught us all on surprise, because it was just so different than what we've expected. And that's really why we were having the conversation on why we wanted to bring it forward to, budget development, because it's kind of one of those things that, like, wow, that's kind of a big deal. And it would be a big deal for us as a district if if they weren't able to provide that service any longer.
Yeah.
Abby, is there, obviously we've benefited financially from the 18%.
Correct.
And we're seeing that reflected, I assume, I don't know what percentage of the 7 million or whatever plus is due to that. And I mean, it's a benefit, but as you really point out, it's a risk because we absolutely rely on those transportation services and trying to, if they went under, trying to replace them would be very difficult. It's a big jump though from 18 to 80.
It is.
And
I think the 18 would, when Jim and I discussed it, the 18 would stay for the short-term closure. So anything that's like snow days, and we don't even know if we're going to have snow days anymore, right? Because now we have one-to-one devices. And so, that's a different conversation. But it's really that 18% was designed for a short-term closure, not, a pandemic where you're closed for 3 months. Yeah. And, even now, and I don't disagree that 18 to 80 is a very big jump. So I don't know how comfortable, or if you guys have a different number, or if you.
Well, it's not. I think I go back to Lori's question about what's the norm. Can we establish some norms? Can we, or at least see what the variety is, and to say, okay, well, it's not that crazy. Actually, 80 is low. We may find for this kind of an arrangement, and that would certainly help me to say, yeah, we should definitely do that, and that's the right number.
Okay. Would you like me to reach out to some of the other districts that have contracted transportation and just see kind of where they landed with the percent that they were paying?
Yeah, I don't know the best way to get that kind of survey or sense of what's normal, but whatever you can do to do it, I think would be helpful.
Okay, sure. I think I'll reach out to a few business managers that I know and see what we can collect relatively quickly.
Okay.
Shouldn't be too hard.
This is just something kind of in the queue, I guess. It's not about right now, but I can't, I would feel like I wasn't, holding up to thinking about the city's, plans for carbon neutrality. And if you think about, opportunities for radical change, I don't want us to forget about there are possibly other ways to transport students, including getting a lot of students onto city buses or even things we haven't imagined yet. So again, it's really nothing to do now, but just, kind of some of that stuff is getting pushed to the back burner as all the other crises come forward. But I remember Jim Fye talking about, what about the, the energy efficiency of the buses in the current fleet? How limited on that, so we don't really have, electric or alternative fuels and so forth. So I don't know, just so we can just park that somewhere that we don't forget about it.
Right.
An opportunity for us to get closer to aggressive environmental goals, and transportation is a huge component of the city's waste. Right?
Sure. Okay. Okay. The next one on the list, which we touched about a little bit, Phil and Aaron, was the CARES funding. And so Jim and I have been talking with Mike as well as the rest of the exec team to kind of determine a plan of how do we want to roll out and how do we want to spend that $1.5 million. It's very likely that we will be using it for some of these additional staff costs that are kind of one-time costs specifically related to the pandemic. And so we'll be finalizing that and we'll share that with you as well. But that's kind of what we've been talking about, because obviously we've had some pretty significant expenses that we wouldn't have had if we were, operating in our normal environment. And so we were brainstorming of ways to do that wouldn't have as much of a budget impact. And so, and then we could articulate too, here's how we used our CARES. The technology leases. That piece is still being finalized. We just received all of the devices in and have signed off. We're just waiting on the final paperwork back from Dell. And so we anticipate that coming here very soon. And so then, there's a couple of adjustments that we need to make to our budget related to that. And so that isn't reflected in what you're looking at today. And then food service is on there as well, just because with the late change with the U.S. Department of Ed and extending, kind of that summer food program, that free. Josh asked if we could take a look at his budget a little bit more closely because the revenue is probably going to look different than what he was expecting. So we have a few pieces to wrap up in food service. And so I don't have anything in my presentation right now talking about food service, which is okay. It's kind of a standalone operation. And really, we kind of talk about them operating like a business. So they need to stand alone and be able to cover their expenses on their own. But I just wanted you to be aware that, again, with some of those late changes and things that we've been learning, that's impacting some of our budget information as well. And then the last item on the list is the athletic fees. And so I really wanted to take some time today to talk with the three of you to get your feelings about athletic fees. So we have lots of discussions about athletic fees, and I would say they really came into play in 2007, 2008, when the district had the operating referendum that failed. There was a big list of things that were made to be looked at from a budget standpoint, and instituting athletic fees was one of the items to help reduce some of that deficit situation that we were facing. And so on an average year, we collect about $250,000, $260,000 in athletic fees. And for those of you that may or may not have students, participating in those, the fees range from $100 to $300 per sport. And then there is a cap of $800 per family. If your family qualifies for free or reduced, obviously there is reductions as well if you're free. If you qualify for free lunch, then you don't pay anything for athletic fees. And if you're reduced, you pay half. And the same thing with that family cap. If you are a family that qualifies for reduced, then that family cap goes to $400. The other piece that's out there is if you're a 3-sport athlete, you pay for the first 2 sports and your third one is free. So that's a brief overview of what the fees are today in our structure. We get lots of questions about fees. We know that our fees are higher than some of our surrounding districts as well. But there's been some hesitation to change it because it's, $250,000 in our budget, and how do we make up that somewhere else? And what we're wondering about and wanted to brainstorm with the three of you today is, what does that look like in this environment? Should we be charging the same for athletic fees, or is this something that should be different? It's in board policy right now that the board approves all fees. And so that's why we're bringing it to budget development. But one of the questions we often get, and one of the struggles for us on our end, is when a season's canceled, we need to refund all of those fees. And so, or we need to work with families to carry them over to the next season, which is fine. But I know we often get the question of, well, why do we have to pay this in the first place? What does it offset? And so since we know that the spring and all of the seasons are going to be shortened where we're at today, wondering if we should modify the athletic fees and our estimates for this 2021 year. We're in a very different year. Kids are in school 2 days a week, or maybe they're doing 100% virtual. And then, if they're in school 2 days a week, they're doing virtual 3 days. So you have that virtual component. So one of the things that we had talked about as an executive team is, do we come forward with a proposal that we say, you know what, in this year, we're going to just reduce athletic fees in half because we know the seasons are shortened. We know that we're not sure how much competition they're going to get. If we have a team, or if we have somebody that gets ill, they might have to quarantine the whole team, and then that could take away from competition. So we did talk that there could still be activities happening virtually, but kind of that competition component's out. I don't anticipate other costs of the athletics necessarily changing per se, because obviously our coaching increments probably wouldn't be changing. You might have some different transportation costs because many of the schools around us are competing now. And so in order to get competition, we might be looking at traveling farther. And so, those would be things that would need to be evaluated. So really just wanted to talk with the three of you to get your thoughts. I know that there's been concern that athletic fees create barriers for our families. I can tell you that I know we've received a donation for the last 2 years for both North and Memorial, that if students are on the bubble and they don't qualify for free or reduced, we have a donor that at each school is willing to cover athletic fees as well as other items that they might need in order to be able to participate. We haven't been able to utilize those full donations, but it is out there, and the athletic directors do have conversations with coaches. So if they know that there's somebody that might not go out because of the fee, they're communicating that, so that way then students are getting that opportunity. But we just know that there's going to be a lot of questions coming our way related to the fact that there's shortened seasons, and the competitions might look differently. So is it something that we should make a recommendation, and if we do, what should that recommendation be?
And Abby, if I'm hearing, the suggestion is, I think I heard you say maybe cut fees in half for this year, given that it's an unusual year. Was that a suggestion?
That was a suggestion. That was one of the things that we talked about. And that was just a place to start.
As a temporary, but just to be clear, as a temporary measure for this year.
Yeah, I mean, I think, we probably need to have more conversations about what does that look like going forward, because I know that there's some concerns, that the amount of our fees are barriers to families, and we don't want to purposefully create barriers. So it's kind of that creative, we'd love to reduce fees or not have any fees, but then how do you make up for that, $250,000 in your budget when you have that hole? So I think deeper conversation, is probably needed. But yeah, for this year, we kind of brainstormed and said, okay, well, what if we cut them in half? So last year, with not having spring sports, our athletic fees were down to $200,000 is what we collected. And so I guess if we went in half, I would assume it would be around that $100,000 is what we would be estimating in our budget for this year.
Hey, Abby, the point about the fees as discriminatory, so my memory, kind of from the last time we talked about in this committee is that, the whole focus was on eliminating barriers. And so I don't like that, whatever my recollection is different, the idea that there are not barriers. And I don't know if, are we making explicit, for example, so the donors at North and Memorial, that it's not just passed by word of mouth or, somebody who might happen to know that this is an option, but that we're making it explicit. Because, families could, might even say, well, don't even try because we can't pay those fees. So they never get to the coach. But if really we have, of what you've said, then how are there barriers? Because my follow-up question is to more think of paying athletic fees as an investment. Mm-hmm. As long as there's no discrimination, I would say I view them as an investment. Sure. And I even think about, so if you cut the fees, okay, but I would rather see those investments made and say, if you've got people on overloads, or you've got this, I don't know, I would say the no-cut sports, I'm a huge fan of that. I want to see every sport be no-cut, and that's in the dream world or whatever, but I want to hire more coaches. I want more kids involved, I want to grow all the programs. So that's just, as long as no one's, there's not discrimination. In fact, you're creating opportunity. Right.
I think that, I guess I can't articulate what barriers I think there are, because I think we offer a lot, and the free and reduced part is very well advertised as well. I mean, it's right on the fee form, and we talk about it at the code signing meetings and things like that. It's on our website. And as soon as I can tell you on my team, if we get a call or a question about it, that they want to do something different, like if they say, hey, we need to set up a payment plan, or we need to do something different, we're always open to that. And then when that comes up, then we usually have the conversation with them one-on-one about, hey, have you filled out a free and reduced application, or we know that we have these scholarships available. I think that I know that the athletic directors with the scholarship donations that we have at each of them, they have lots of conversations with families and students, but is it explicitly advertised in the building? I can't answer that question. We've talked about it, but we kind of have to trust that they're doing that piece of it. And so I know that amongst when they have their meetings, and I know I've been in some of the coaches' meetings just from activities my kids have participated in, the coaches will mention as well, if there's a concern about fees or if you need, equipment or something like that, to please see them. But is there a barrier because a student doesn't want to, reach out or something? That could be one that's perceived. Yeah, I mean, I can't say that I can articulate what the barriers are for families and for students. I know that when kids are participating in activities, they're more engaged in school as well, and they do better academically. And so I agree. I mean, I think it would be awesome if we could expand and have more, just because we know it's good for kids. And so, it's probably for a deeper discussion for sure. But I do know that we try to do everything we can to help kids participate, because we know that we don't want to have any barriers intentionally.
So Abby, if you're a student athlete, you pay the fee. And if you're not a student athlete, you don't pay the fee.
There are a few activities that you pay a fee, but it's different. So like I can tell you drama, forensics, math counts, and I feel like the academic decathlon, there's a $50 participation fee on those. And they would have the same discounts available. So if they happen to be free or reduced, it would be the same, kind of applied the same thing. There's just not a cap or a family cap on the activity fee.
Is this going to be a board discussion?
Yeah, it would have to be a board discussion because it's in board policy that the board would need to approve.
So if I'm in golf and golf actually has a season, I don't mind paying the fee.
Okay.
If I'm in football and football doesn't have a season, are we going to be charging the fee to student athletes that never play?
No, I would say if our past practice has been if something doesn't happen, we don't charge fees. So for example, let's go back to last spring when we canceled, there was no spring athletics. We issued refunds for all of the athletics that would have taken place normally in the spring, high school and middle school. So we would do the same thing, that if the season doesn't happen, we wouldn't charge them.
Then I like the half fee, and I don't know if there's if it's trying to be cost recovery, or it's just offsetting resources, but I like a reduced fee for those students and their parents that understand that there's probably not as much expense to the sport as there would be in other years.
Right.
Is that true? Is there? Do we know kind of the projected cost?
I don't know that. I don't. There could be some reduced cost, but there could be some increased cost, because if we think about, so the coaching cost is probably, it's going to be the same unless we have less coaches, right? Because there's less students out. Transportation costs, that's a really hard one to say, because we might normally be transporting to Chippewa and Menominee and Rice Lake, where you are taking a school bus and it's, much cheaper, versus now we have to go to Madison to compete. And so the costs are different. So it's really hard for me to definitively be able to say the costs are going to be less. I don't know that they are. I think in some sports the cost might be less, but in some sports the cost might be more. I think, kind of our thought was, with a proposed reduction to the fees, is that we know it's going to be different. The season itself is going to be shorter, and just trying to recognize that we're in the middle of a pandemic, and the competition part of it might also be different, because we might be doing intercity competitions, right? I mean, we might have North and Memorial hockey a couple times a week because those are the only ones that can play, and I don't mean to make light of it, but those are just some of the conversations that we've had of, are we going to be able to travel outside of the county? How do we comply with the county health order? And so it's very real in all of us when we're talking about it, and we want to recognize that their experience this year is likely to be very different than it's been in the past.
Board members benefit. First off, the seasons, I think Abby did allude to it a little bit earlier, is that with this altered schedule, for example, with that new fall schedule from March to May, that is a shortened season compared to what typically occurs. So that's one reason why we thought so. And quite frankly, it's happened. Maybe you've seen the news with some other schools. But, especially with a high risk sport, there could be the likelihood to have a 2-week quarantine. And that's okay. And if it happens, it happens. But also I'm really, I guess another thing we had spoken about was, let's say another school wasn't able to play us because maybe they weren't able to go out of county. At least our coaches, even though our data would be really good in Eau Claire, our coaches would still work with the athletes. Now, would that be a reduced number of competitions? Could be. But like Abby mentioned, I mean, this is something that we're going to ask athletic and activity parents about. If we can't fill from without, maybe North had this opponent and Memorial had a different opponent, and maybe they both canceled, we could play intra-city. And I think the health department would appreciate that too, that we're not traveling over to Stevens Point or maybe traveling up to Superior. But, those are just things we were just brainstorming. But I think a reduced rate is appropriate during these times.
Thanks, Mike, for chiming in.
Okay, and Abby, do you see this being part of then for Monday's discussion, is looking for just some thoughts on this, but not a vote, right?
Right. Yeah, I really would like to talk about it on Monday night because it would have an impact to the budget for sure. And so that's one of the pieces, again, when I'm talking about items to finalize. Right now, I don't have anything reflected in there for athletic fees because, that was the same conversation that we were having as an executive team of how do we do this and what does it look like? And so, that's why I wanted to kind of get budget development's feel and see what your thoughts were. And I think it's been a good conversation, but I think, we need to kind of have the full board weigh in as well. But it would be a similar conversation, and then it would have to go for a vote probably the next time. So that way then we'd have it finalized. And then that would be, reflected when we have our final budget adoption on the 26th.
Okay.
One thing, can I say, just from a staff perspective that I'm thinking about, can we say that we are properly compensating all of the, coaches and coaching staff members? Can we say that in a normal year? And can we say that this year, that everyone is being properly compensated? That would be a thing that, with overloads that you've been talking about and that asking people to do more than ever, just that becomes more important than ever.
So I guess I have a question about what do you mean by properly compensating? Are you asking about the amount, or are you asking about the fact that they're getting paid? Because those are two very different things for me.
Yes. So everyone who's working as a member of a coaching staff, are they getting paid, and are they getting paid competitive rates? Okay.
So I'll start with the competitive rates first. We've had on the table for a very long time increments in the increment review. And so are they getting paid? Yes, they're getting paid. They're not getting paid today because the fall season didn't happen, but with the alternate season that's planned right now, we plan to pay them because obviously they're working and doing coaching responsibilities, which is different than their regular job. Are they getting paid competitively? That needs to be looked at. And so we've talked before about, the increment work that needs to be done and the increment committee needing to be evaluated. So I would say that that needs to be reviewed. That's been on our list for a while. But I can confidently say they're getting compensated. I just can't tell you that it's the right amount because it needs to be evaluated. And the rate that they're being paid at was, it hasn't changed for many years. And so it does definitely need to be looked at.
It's a base wage is the kind of the crux of the problem, isn't it, Abby? I seem to remember from previous conversations, base wage is
when increments were designed, it was based upon the base that was set like in 2007 or 8, and it's a percentage of that. And so it doesn't fluctuate from year to year. And it's very different. It's very much based upon our old salary schedule that had longevity built into it and things like that. And it's very different from our current salary schedule and since the change. And so I know that in 2012, I believe, there was the increment committee that met and brought some suggestions to the board. And then the board really kind of put that on hold to work through a new compensation plan and a new compensation system. And so this has kind of just been hanging out there ever since. So we know that it needs to be done. We're just kind of waiting for that direction to be given to say like, yep, this is our priority this year and we need to work on it. So I think we've had, OPEB is one that obviously has been on our mind and we've been talking about. So again, it's just that, how do we prioritize that? But it's definitely work that needs to be done. I don't want to say that it's perfect. It's not.
Would there be, thinking about linking that to the ad hoc committee? Well, it's not ad hoc, but.
Oh, right.
The increments work. It sounds like it's pretty pressing.
Yeah. I mean, it's been on hold for a very long time. And so I think that, we're looking at the increments differently already right now, just because due to the situation and the work that's normally done is being done differently, or it's not being done at all. And so I think that presents us with an opportunity to look at that, big picture district wide. So I know that Kay and I have brought it up multiple times that we definitely know that work needs to be done. We're just kind of waiting for that direction to say, yes, now's the time. And so
it's been on our to-do list for at least a couple of years. And
yes,
unfortunately, it falls in the category of money spending, not money saving. And that's been part of the hesitation, I think. Sure. But I definitely, Lori, I definitely have been thinking about it as something for the holistic committee to tackle early in their time. So it's on my list for what it's worth as a topic for them.
What if, would this be a key piece for the referendum? This is, I'm not saying a new idea here, but to have that information in place before the referendum planning starts formally now seems pretty critical.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, it will have an impact to operations, I think, in the big scheme of things. So that definitely would help us make a more informed decision, when the things are put together in terms of a referendum and what is needed. It definitely would be valuable to have that work completed. Okay. And we're getting down. We have about 15 minutes left. And so I do, if it's okay, I'd like to kind of move through the rest of our slides that we've got. I think we've had the bulk of our discussion, but just a few more things that I wanted to highlight and share with you in case you have questions. So when we talked about debt service, Phil, you asked the question about our tax levy and kind of our debt service before. So debt service is part of our total tax levy. And so I really just wanted to show a comparison of what's the tax levy from last year, what was it, and where are we at today. You'll keep in mind that there is several things that will change when we get our aid certification in October 15th, and they will impact these pieces. And really only the general fund is the only piece that will change because that's due to the revenue limit formula. And so you can see when we were talking earlier about that local funds going down, you can see the tax levy itself in Fund 10 is down 2.6 million, and that is a direct reflection of the additional state aid that we're getting or anticipating getting when we get that October 15th certification. I think you will remember we've had a lot of conversation about debt service over the course of the last year, and so I think you'll remember we talked about a debt drop in 2021 and how that was going to impact our tax levy. And so that's being reflected right here in Fund 38 and 39. So when we add those together, that's about $1 million. And our debt service levy is exactly based upon the debt payments that we have to make. And so 2021 was the year that we were benefiting from a tax levy drop because we've paid off some of our debt. And so that's $1 million of our tax levy drop right there. And then Fund 80, we've talked a lot about that. And that really comes down to the fact that our fall sports have been canceled. And so the cost associated with fall sports has been taken out of there because we don't want to levy our taxpayers for something we know that we're not going to pay this year. And so that really would be transportation. It would be increments, paying coaches, any other supplies that are needed and things like that really is being reflected there. So as of today, we're projecting about a $3.8 million tax levy drop, which is about 52 cents on the mill rate. And so that number will be different on October 26th when we finalize because of the changes that are coming on October 15th. And I'll highlight for you just a few of those changes on October 15th. One of the things that I'm concerned about and one of the things that we're really watching is our 3-year membership average. And so in the revenue limit formula, we look at part of that calculation is the 3-year membership average. You can see I have a big circle around 2020. That's because we're still finalizing that count. Our summer school count is down because we had to provide virtual summer school last summer. So that is going to impact our count overall. And then I basically put in numbers to have a flat rolling 3-year average. I anticipate this number is going to be lower because we know we have students that are going out to other districts or out to private schools. So I don't have the final numbers and I won't have that final until after our October 15th aid certification, but that's something that we're concerned about and we're watching because the last few years we've been benefiting from being a growing district. And now based upon where we think numbers might come in, I think we're going to be considered a declining enrollment for this year. And so we'll really need to pay attention to see what's going to happen, when we get to go back to 5 days of school and how does that impact our numbers. The next piece that we're still waiting on information on, and it impacts our tax levy as well, is our equalized valuation. And so this information comes from the Wisconsin Department of Revenue. So what I've calculated in our preliminary tax calc is I'm using the last certification that we received a year ago, and it always comes out around the end of September. So I'm anticipating that any day. I just don't have it yet. And that amount will be confirmed as well on our revenue limit worksheet on October 15th. That comes from DPI. This number, this $964,000 number, that's our private school vouchers. And so in our budget that I've presented to you today, I've reflected this $964,000. That's the amount that we paid in vouchers last year. That's my best guess estimate because I don't know until October 15th what that number is going to be and how that it goes into our levy. And so I always try to just estimate it's going to be the same. It's likely going to be higher just because we know that we have more students going to private schools. DPI told us yesterday that across the state, private school enrollment is up. Now, that doesn't necessarily reflect vouchers, but just in general that they're seeing an increase in the private school enrollment. So I know last year we thought we were going to almost hit $1 million. And so I won't be surprised this year if it comes in at $1 million. But that's a number that will change between now and October 26th. The last pieces of the revenue limit that get certified to SRL is really about our state aid for exempt computers and personal properties. And so in the budget right now, I've used what we got last year. Again, I'll get those final numbers on October 15th. So that will play into that whole revenue limit calculation as well. But we always try to put in there what the previous year was because it doesn't fluctuate a ton from year to year. Then a little bit about Fund 80, and just why, again, some more information about why that tax levy decreased. And you can kind of see last year with the cancellation of spring sports that our expenses were, we had a profit of about $40,000 compared to what our revenue was in Fund 80 last year. Which makes sense because we would have levied some of those spring sport costs that we would have anticipated having. So this year, we always try to project a balanced budget in Fund 80 when we're adopting it. And so really the things that offset and why we're lower is we don't have any facility rentals going on. We know that fall sports aren't going to happen. And so we've kind of adjusted and made some calculations and estimates based upon what we think will happen. And that's why you're seeing lower revenue and lower expenses as well. And so then our tax levy obviously would be reduced to get to that that zero kind of number in preliminary budget. The Fund 80 tax levy, we're kind of in that final review process. So I think it's going to be pretty close to where I'm at today, but there could be one or two changes in there coming forward. Oh, I think I maybe had this slide in here twice. Or they're very similar. So again, just another, difference that our Fund 80, we're expecting it to be about $209,000 difference this year. Than what it was. Oh, I guess before we were looking at it as revenue and expense, and then this is just more revenue detail. And then I have one that's expense detail, and just kind of broken down again, supporting that difference. And you can see the bulk of those changes are really coming through the salary and fringe, which makes sense because at middle school, all students are allowed to participate in activities and there's no cut. So if we have more kids participating, we add more coaches and more increments. The contracted services, that difference is really just due to transportation for the fall sports that were canceled. Obviously supplies is up a little bit, just due to some things that they need for the sports. And then the capital expenditures, that is, we have a couple of requests for new volleyball standards for our buildings. And so they are allowed in Fund 80. We usually prorate, usually some of it's used for FIAD and that's in Fund 10, but then there's a community use component as well as a athletic component. And so that's just the year that it's time to replace some of that equipment. And so that's why you see some this year. We didn't have any last year. And then other expenses are really just going to be kind of that. They're just other expenses. Another thing that we didn't spend a lot of time talking about today, but again, I know we've spent a lot of time in the past talking about it, is Fund 23 and our OPEB. And so really just wanted to be able to keep that on your radar that, overall, we're getting up into that about $8 million expense again for that OPEB piece. And so, our budget last year was about 7.3 million. At the end of the year, our actuals were 7.5, and our preliminary estimates this year are for 7.9. So I know that that's on our list to keep working on, and I know that I need to bring back to the committee kind of where did we land and where did we stop our discussions last year. But just wanted to let you know that in that final adopted budget, you'll have about $8 million of OPEB expense throughout all of our funds. And then, again, these are all things that we've talked about. So in addition to the list of items that's bigger than normal due to the pandemic and things happening, really that final reconciliation before budget adoption is our third Friday student count. That'll solidify our state aid number. Will give us our computer aid number. We'll finalize the tax levy. We'll finalize our transportation expense again, because that's always been tied to our revenue limit calculation, and then open enrollment. I am concerned about the open enrollment this year, just knowing that I've heard that we know that our enrollment is down, and the kids have to go somewhere. And so with other districts offering 5 days a week, I think that our open enrollment number is going to be different than what we're used to. And we usually have about a $2 million difference from what students coming in and students going out. And so I'm just wanted to remind you that we don't have that final number, but to kind of have it on your radar that could be something that could have a bigger budget impact than what we might be planning on today. And so with that, what other questions do you have? And then kind of on our future agenda items, I know we don't have any more budget development meeting dates set yet. Wanted to give you an opportunity to see if we needed to meet again before the formal budget adoption, or if you guys are feeling like we're in a good place. And then, just get something on the calendar so we've got it on a rotating basis. And then obviously our OPEB, I know last time we talked about me bringing back, where did we kind of land with things? What were the items on the table, and talk about next steps. And then kind of our work list. And Aaron, I know increments is on our work list. We kind of had those out there as well. So.
Indeed. Yeah, and the budget adoption meeting, remind me of the date.
It's October 26th.
26th.
Yep. It's a Monday night, and we have to have the public hearing, and then the board formally adopts the budget after that. And I think it's a 5 o'clock or 5:30 meeting. I don't remember for sure.
Well, I think Monday's discussion could help us determine how much that's needed. A meeting in between.
In between. Okay.
Yeah, for the purposes of budget adoption. And then, of course, we have other items on our list which aren't affected by the budget adoption as much.
Yep.
So
do you want to wait and see?
Yeah, I'd be inclined that way, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, you and I can connect, or Mike and you can connect, and we can, if we feel that we need to have a meeting, we can get one scheduled before that budget adoption.
Right. Yeah.
Okay. Anything else that you think we need to include for Monday night, or questions that I should have answers to?
Assuming you captured the list, that the list that we've gone over covers it for me. Phil or Lori?
Agreed.
Yeah, agreed.
Okay. Okay. Well, with that, if you guys are ready to adjourn, we can take a motion to adjourn.
I'll motion to adjourn.
Okay. Lori, you seconded? Okay, thanks. All in favor, say aye.
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 Perfect. Thanks, everybody, for the time and for the discussion. We appreciate it.
See you Monday.
See you Monday.
See you then.
Yep.
This program was brought to you by a cooperation between Newsworks and the Eau Claire Area School Board. Newsworks is made possible by continuing community support. If you would like to volunteer or make a donation, please contact us via phone at 715-839-5067 or online at valleymediaworks.org.